Hey, hello, it's Basic Folk. This is a podcast where we have honest conversations with folk musicians. I'm your host, Cindy Howes. Thanks for joining me. Today, we are going to be talking to David Huckfelt, who is a member of the Minneapolis folk band The Pines, and he has put a solo record out this year called Stranger Angels. We're going to thank our sponsors and then get into what David and I talk about on Basic Folk. Basic Folk is brought to you in part by Tina and Her Pony, a queer duo bringing traditional Appalachian music and vocal harmonies into the 21st century. Visit tinaandherpony.com. Like I said, David Huckfelt, founding member of The Pines. David is a person who emanates poetry in everything he does. From his solo work to his outlook on life. Basically, David Huckfelt is like living artwork. When I was preparing for this interview, I had like so many pages of questions because every time he, would write something or every time he would have an interview with someone else, it would spark so many different ideas. I think I bring that up a couple of times in the interview, but it was kind of difficult to prepare. We just had about an hour to talk, and it felt like not long enough. But it was a real pleasure to speak with him about his Iowa upbringing, his connection to indigenous people, and his 2-week solitary writing retreat on the most remote and least visited national park that is located a 6-hour boat ride off of Lake Superior. And also, like I said, that David is like very poetic in his delivery. So I tried to get David to admit that when he was a kid, like most people his own age in the late 80s, early 90s, he was into like Ninja Turtles and The Lion King as a young kid. But he just like kept coming back with examples like really being into Waylon Jennings in that Big Bird movie, Follow That Bird, or like Muddy Waters on Mr. Rogers. He's like, oh yeah, sure, I liked He-Man and stuff too, but I'm like, I don't believe you. But he's just very cool. Anyways, we get into some pretty deep and serious conversations about souls, rights of women, and spirituality. David is a theology school dropout, and he talks about what caused him to walk away from that life path. David's music sounds like the earth. It has this warm darkness to it. And on his solo album, Stranger Angels, he uses these really interesting field recordings that give the song an extra, sometimes eerie layer. I really enjoyed talking to David, and I also enjoyed listening to his album, Stranger Angels. We'll hear the title track, a clip of the song Stranger Angels, and get to our conversation with David Huckfelt on Basic Folk.
I'm the next of kin to the wayward wind I'm going. I can't sing this dance or dance this song, I'm gone. Some place where I won't make the greedy richer. On the rock and birch bark shores of old Minneapolis. So gather everything you hold dear. Practice giving it away.
David Huckfelt, thank you so much for talking to me.
Cindy, it's a pleasure. I'm really glad to speak with you, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, so pumped. You're originally, and correct me if I'm wrong, Spencer, Iowa?
Correct, yep. Clay County.
Okay. I was looking up some pictures of what the town looked like, but could you paint a picture?
Well, you'd have to almost pick an era because, quite some time ago, Spencer was a pretty vibrant, beautiful farm town, surrounded by family farms, kind of a population center with a little main street and a big county fair every fall in September. And over the course of my lifetime, much of that has changed with corporate farming and a Walmart and a Home Depot coming to town, and so the main street is a little quiet these days. Just a quaint farm town that grew a little bigger than the others around it.
And you lived with your grandparents when you were a teenager?
I did. Yeah, my parents split up, and my grandparents were. I mean, we were close to begin with, but if you end up moving in with your grandparents after they've been married for 63 years, while you're still in high school, then you become very close, and seeing how that generation dealt with modern realities, and so they had a little hobby farm, not a big farm, but a little farm on the edge of town, and it became kind of my sanctuary, solitude, and shelter from all the stuff that was going on in my world. It was a pretty beautiful year to get to know them. You know, I was the only kid in high school that was eating a 5-course breakfast probably every day, thanks to my grandmother. So,
oh wow,
yeah.
And then David, when did your affinity for nature begin, and then where were the outside places you were drawn to at first?
Well, a couple places. I mean, my grandfather, for one, you know, I would serve him lunch every day. They ran a little appliance store, and he would come home for lunch, and we would sit and talk. And I somehow, you know, I developed the ability to pull stories out of him, and I had the time, and I was there. So I heard a lot about his hunting and fishing trips into Canada and Wyoming and western Nebraska. And he did things for me, like I remember being, you know, about 8 or 9 years old, and he sponsored a wolf up in northern Minnesota. There was this program you could sponsor a wolf at a recovery center, and you get little updates and stuff. And it was all in the mail, not online, but I had pictures of my wolf, and he was named Lakota, I remember. And and you know, so there was that aspect of my grandfather's experience, and then, you know, our family was spread out across the western United States, and my uncle especially, he brought me out to Montana for the first time in high school, and took me to a campground in the Paradise Valley, which is just between Livingston, Montana, and the north entrance of Yellowstone. So it truly is one of the most spectacular and wild places in the 48 states. And I think if you come from Iowa, everything looks amazing. The ocean looks amazing. The mountains look amazing. So really, it just kind of set in me this idea that I found a way I could be in nature. I was never an extreme camping, extreme sports kind of person. I liked sitting quietly in some beautiful place for as long as I could, and just sort of letting it soak in. So that was a young experience for me, for sure. Started me off on that path.
Where was music in your young life, and like what were people listening to around you that resonated?
Well, you know, we didn't have anyone in my immediate family that played an instrument, but I had another uncle who was a guitar player. I knew he had a band, and I saw him a couple times. But more than that, it's dawned on me to a greater extent as I've gotten older. My mother just absolutely lives and breathes and loved music. She had this enormous vinyl collection, you know, and I would be sifting through it. I mean, she wasn't just a person who had music. She listened to music constantly. Her favorites were Fleetwood Mac and Rod Stewart. I mean, I don't always. I grew to, you know, we don't always overlap in taste, but we always overlap in the ability and the curiosity. So those things started out, and my uncles would send me music. He made me the kind of the coolest mixtapes. I mean, cassette tapes. I still have some of them with, you know, outtake versions of Rocky Raccoon and some comedians and practical jokes and songs and novelty songs. And you know, I had this kind of, as I get older, it was a very eclectic upbringing. I can remember sitting at my little record player and playing, you know, the Robin Hood and Little John soundtrack done by Roger Miller, you know, and flipping the pages, Peter and the Wolf. So it was just that feeling of like, you can tell when someone absolutely loves music. It's infectious, and that was going on in my house for sure. At least as a young person, I took on my own approach as I got older to find the stuff I liked, but it was there.
Let's go back to the Disney stuff. I was trying to figure out how old you are, and I think, are you maybe just about 40 or
I am.
not quite?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I am 40. Yep, exactly.
So I'm 37,
Okay.
and it sounds like we maybe had a similar like Disney experience where I'm trying to like think about like Robin Hood definitely is an older Disney film, but then like the Disney Renaissance happened, you know, and I remember having the cassettes of like all of the movies that came out: Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Lion King. Those were the four.
Sure.
And yeah, it definitely reminded me of that. Did you ever get into the Disney like Renaissance film, or did you just stick with like the super cool like 30-year-olds Disney films?
No, you know, I think that for me, I mean, if I can trace it from where my musical sensibilities ended up and try to look back at where they began, I mean, you had things in my childhood like, you know, like Waylon Jennings in the Sesame Street movie, you know, and you had
Follow That Bird?
Yeah. And you had an episode of the Mr. Rogers Show where the Mississippi Delta blues musician Otha Turner and Jessie Mae Hemphill come on to teach Mr. Rogers about hill country blues. You know, I can even remember Johnny Cash in Little House on the Prairie. You know, it's kind of,
wow.
And I'm not just trying to pick out these cool examples. I listen to plenty bad pop music too, you know.
Tell me about He-Man and Ninja Turtles.
Absolutely, yeah. It was all there.
Well, that's good to know because, like, yeah, all of the examples that you're giving me, I would think, are very, like, authentic presentations of music within, like, a kid's world,
Yeah.
you know? That's not corny,
Right.
you know? Like, Little Mermaid, kind of corny, but awesome.
But awesome,
you know? But
yeah.
No question here, just a comment.
Yeah, no, I feel the same. I mean, I think that, you know, there's a great comedian named Mitch Hedberg he's from Minnesota, where I live now, and he said, any book is a kid's book if the little dude can read, you know. And it's kind of this idea that, you know, my mom loved the stories behind the music and people's lives, and so I feel like, you know, when I was growing up and even when I got into high school, you know, I had her record collection, you know, Led Zeppelin, Cat Stevens, Gordon Lightfoot, just this stuff, and I thought I was the coolest kid in Iowa, you know, because
You probably were.
I don't know. I was pretty nerdy in a lot of other ways, but yeah, the affinity for music and the love of it as a part of daily life, I'd say that's what I got from my childhood.
Was your mom into Carole King at all? Like the Maurice Sendak, really rosy stuff?
You know, she not so much. I don't know how you even describe. She loved the Eagles, and she just like, I mean, Rod Stewart sits on a mountain in her mind. That's the god of all things. You know, she wouldn't listen. I mean, I guess, you know, I would say the biggest were Rod Stewart and Stevie Nicks. Those just like kind of define the sounds of my childhood to me.
So then, David, when did you start playing music?
Well, I was what they call a late bloomer today, when people are starting their kids off with violin lessons at age 4. You know, I didn't really touch a guitar until I was 18. I'd always been a writer. I thought I wanted to be a poet or a preacher. Those were my early ambitions, or a baseball player. Really, that was kind of my aim. And then, but like most singer-songwriter type people that you've probably talked to, a lot of them at least, there's a time when somebody, you know, plays you a Bob Dylan record, and then everything just kind of flips upside down on its head. So Blowin' in the Wind and Folsom Prison were the first two songs that I tried to learn on guitar when I was senior in high school, and my whole world was shifting pretty quickly. So didn't have any lessons or anything. I just listened to the records and taught myself chords, and and I hoped that I could turn some of these writings I did into songs at some point. Those were my simple goals at the time.
And then it happened.
It happened to whatever degree this reality is. You could say that it happened.
So it's very clear to me that you enjoy making music with friends. When did you first come to realize that joy of playing music with other people, and how has that experience evolved for you over time?
It was interesting because in Northwest Iowa, where I'm from, the main thing that's going on for a young man is sports, a lot of sports, team sports, basketball, football, all these. I was always surrounded by a bunch of people, and we're always learning how to work together. So when I was asked to my first jam session or whatever, in Iowa City, I was so mortified and nervous because I figured I had no business being there and wasn't good enough. But very naturally, I think I realized that I never was the person who was the most proficient on their instrument, but I definitely have a very easy time memorizing songs. And in all the verses to all the songs. I was, around a campfire, I found I was the only one that could finish, a Neil Young song, a John Prine song. I've always been able to do that somehow. So for me to have my limitations and then get on board playing with people with other talents and collaboration who understand the power of a song, that's just about, the best thing I can imagine, honestly. Endlessly rewarding, improvisational. I just really enjoyed it. And I wanted to be the kind of person that was easy to play with, A lot of songwriters.
What does that mean?
Well, I think that, part of it is being a decent human being and listening more than you speak. And then, also just technically speaking, as a rhythm guitar player, I think a lot of songwriters, they're so used to playing by themselves, they don't know if their time is bad, their rhythm is off. They're not quite aware. And if you play with other people, a good drummer will let you know, a good bass player will let you know. And it's some of our favorite folk songwriters, it's really overlooked what great guitar players they are and how they lay a foundation. When you hear 3 notes of a John Prine song, finger picking, it's him immediately.
Yeah.
So that was important to me.
Is it okay if we have a conversation about faith?
Absolutely.
You're a former theology student. Is it possible to talk about what originally connected you to faith and what made you want to dedicate your life to it?
It is possible. It's murky in there. In the sense of, because we can only see where we have been, from the distance that we've traveled from that time, So looking back, I have a different understanding of why I was drawn to, philosophical, religious, kind of existential questions. I think it's almost inherent in the Midwest, in the land of long winters and stuff. It's like life leads you to a place where you are pretty cool and accepting with where you are just being your reality, or it drives you nuts what you might be missing and why things are the way they are. And I think
Let me guess which one you were.
Yeah. I was very much like, because it's a conservative area in the country. Iowa itself is, and Northwest Iowa especially, you have this net of assumptions, Every 3 blocks there's a different church, and every one of them has some small variation on the Christian theme. But if you are lucky enough to have some holes poked in your world, to go to places, to travel, to go to Montana, to go to, I went to Chicago as a young person, things don't add up. The explanations begin to look kind of kind of rickety, and if you just visit, I had the experience of going to Pine Ridge Indian Reservation as a pretty young man with my uncle to take winter clothes and boots and some donations, and that Christian worldview really wasn't holding up very well for me the more of the world that I saw. So I thought what I'd
Can you talk a little bit more about that trip? Because I did read about that your uncle took you there, that he majored in American Indian studies. Can you tell me a little bit more about your uncle and a little bit more about what you saw there on the reservation?
First of all, just uncles and aunts are important people, and we're not quite as connected to a tribal society as our ancestors were, but what that role is to take you out of your comfort zone and keep you safe and let you see something that might scare you, it might wow you. It's certainly going to make an impression. And my uncle was involved in the church, but in an overwhelmingly humanitarian way. In other words, what I noticed is when there was a flood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, it was, my uncle took a church group to go and clean up. He took kids to Appalachia to build bunk beds in really poor communities in Kentucky. They've been to Juarez, Mexico, and I had this respect for the humanitarian aspect of it, but the worldview itself, started to really not fit and to crumble when you see, for instance, what's been done to native cultures in the name of Christianity, and also just to have come into contact with a worldview, a narrative, a creation story, a moral code that is nothing. It's got nothing to do. It's older than, the evangelical church down the street. It's an ancient culture. And so I think it just kind of is like a crowbar that just knocks off the assumptions that maybe everybody in your own little small town isn't right about all this stuff, and taking for granted the fact that they attach to this one particular story, and it began to feel more like a trap and a box, and quite honestly, it began to feel more like a lie, because a lot of lies have been told over the course of American history to justify some aspects. So, I guess I'm kind of rambling, but what I mean to say is that I have both sides. I had a certain amount of respect for the fact that on this earth and in this country, sometimes the only people that help others in need are people with a strong faith. They can be extremely helpful, but as helpful as they can be extremely destructive with the same belief system, and imposing it upon people. So I had a lot of stuff to figure out, I guess. No wonder I was so confused.
You can swear on this podcast.
Okay, a lot of shit to figure out because it was tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read the quote about your first visit to that Indian reservation washed away 2 semesters of theology studies and most of what I was taught about American history, which is wild. So it was of course in what you saw when you were there, but what about having conversations with Native people?
Well, it's almost like a kind of loaded, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, fortuitous, yes, but like foreshadowing moments. That day on Pine Ridge, I was, sleeping on a high school gymnasium floor, and my uncle, he woke me up by putting a set of headphones on my head, and on his Walkman was playing John Trudell, American Indian activist, a song called Crazy Horse. So that's how I woke that morning, and of course, I mean, I was ripe to hear it. It was a message I needed to hear, and it was very stirring to me. And then I tell you no lie, like about an hour later, we're having breakfast, and someone comes in and says, "Hey, John Trudell's in town today, and he's speaking over at the Jumping Bull compound where FBI agents were killed in 1979. Leonard Peltier, the whole story. there's a rally today, and he's there, and everyone's welcome. And my uncle just looked at me, and I looked at him, and I was like, well, I think I'm supposed to go to that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It just had a profound effect. I heard him talk. He talked for an hour and a half, from his heart about how to protect your spirit in today's world. And he was talking to Native people, but the message was there for anybody who would listen. Your spirit's in danger. There are massive forces, corporate and otherwise, that want to turn you into a machine. And I just, that was about 15 years before we had the chance to bring him to Minneapolis with my band The Pines and write and record a song with him, the last recording he ever made before he died. So the stars are involved, I guess is what I'm saying.
Wow, that's really powerful. I was wondering if you can talk more about bringing Native issues forward through your music, particularly being a white man in America. How do you work to be an ally?
It's a endlessly refreshed question. It has to be asked all the time, because if you over-identify yourself as a spokesperson for anything, you're already in danger, and I guess I stick by some rules. I mean, there's an incredible book by Vine Deloria, and it's just called We Talk, You Listen, and it's kind of a litany of Native issues, but it's still the best policy. Yeah, I think relationships and friendships that arise around music are invaluable, because what Facebook and Instagram and the internet has shown us is that the illusion that we're more connected, we're really more isolated, and we're really speaking increasingly just to those who think the same thoughts and the same ideals that we have, Mm-hmm. So there's something that can transpire in genuine friendships and partnerships that kind of bucks the stay in your lane mentality, especially if you're not concerned with who is getting the credit and how to do your role. I think I was just this weekend I played Water is Life Festival, put on by Honor the Earth by Winona LaDuke in Duluth, and I think that music is one of the last places where all the lines can get crossed. Collaboration, ownership matters so much less than the song that's being played and who's playing it. So, I think of those good songs the way that I think of like our national parks or something. They belong to all of us. Maybe Johnny Cash wrote it. Maybe Floyd Westerman wrote it. Maybe John Trudell wrote it. Maybe Woody Guthrie wrote it. But in a way, it was a gift to everyone. And I think you can bring rise to those issues and let the music speak for itself if you have open ear, open mind, and and you cultivate friendships. I mean, some of it's being in the right place at the right time. I know that with John Trudell, he was quite ill when he did the song with us, and he had a burning need to get as much of his art and his love out into the world as possible. And we happened to have one little channel that we could open up and to help him, and I think that's just vital. I think that's happened throughout history, and music's always played a big role.
So let's talk about the Pines. That's your band that's been together for at least 15 years at this point. With Ben and Alex Ramsey, and they are the sons of Bo Ramsey, who's a well-known guitarist in the folk world thanks to his work with people like Greg Brown. And Bo and Greg's work together is pretty unconventional, like pretty dark for the folk world. Not that it's like all dark, but there's this like certain, it's not a sinister darkness, I guess, but a certain darkness. And it seems like that style has crept into the Pines a little bit, as one might assume. But can you talk about what you like about the Ramseys' approach to music and maybe how your style would not be the same without them.
Well, that's absolutely true. I mean, there's an aspect of it's literally like living and breathing songs. It's the living example of not overthinking things. It's like, I mean, it's religion. If you're practicing religion, the music. I mean, especially record making with Bo Ramsey is a ritual. It's literally a ritual. It has so much importance because the reverence they have for art, for music, and so I could speak at length. How much I've learned being in proximity to that, getting to make records with Bo and with Benson and Alex. It's such a high reverence that it's very out of step with what music business is, especially now. Records are things that can change your whole life. They change the way that you think about your partner, your child. They literally are integrated in your work. So there's that reverence there. That's a big part of it. And then the other part of it, I think, is the dark aspects of it. I think is the best way I can put it is there's a bravery to it.
Ooh, that's good.
Yeah, it's pretty unafraid to stare down just how bad things can get and just how bad things can look, and to say, it's along the lines of great Russian novelists who, they kind of layer upon layer of dark, heavy before they blast you with light. It's like that's what I see. I don't see it as being, even the Pines. People would say we are dark and moody and stuff, but to me, it's really about hope and bravery. I mean, I think, there's a great quote by David Foster Wallace. It says, the truth will set you free, but not until it's done with you. And that's kind of the feeling I have, is like Greg Brown's poetry it's so brave. It's so willing to look at things in the eye, and it's not going to be convinced by, some glib statement that everything's going to be okay. It's very honest. It's a very honest take on beauty, on pain, on sorrow, on, cultural bankruptcy. It just, it's unflinching. And so that definitely found its way into the Pines songwriting. Honestly, a lot of music out there, it feels like you're watching a commercial, try to get you to be smarter, prettier, thinner, happier, and sometimes you just want to hear it's okay to be sad. It really is. It's okay to let that whole feeling of heaviness just be heavy and acknowledge it, and then maybe you can let it pass like a cloud. That was a big part of what the Pines did, I think, on tour and in our records, is just give people a little bit of room to not be so fucking perfect all the time, like,
yeah. Oh, ain't that the truth? Jeez.
Yeah.
Are the Pines done, or will there be future recordings?
I hope there will be future recordings. I mean, the break that we have decided to take was very open-ended, and the only real solid thing about it is that it was not, there was no solid ending to it. It was an actual honest break, and when that happens, you never know. You don't know if you'll find yourselves back in that space or when, but I know for a fact that we didn't stop because there was no more music to be made together. I think about 90% of an artist's or songwriter's job, musician's job today, is just to not to go from the endangered species list to the extinction list, because most people I know are somewhere right around that line, with streaming and with not being able to sell records and with everybody in the world on tour at the same time. It's tough. So we wanted to take a break and preserve our lives and our sanity and do some other things for a while.
All right, we're 42 minutes into this interview. Let's talk about the new album.
Okay.
The album Stranger Angels. So in 2017, you spent a couple weeks on Isle Royale, the largest island in the world's largest freshwater lake in Lake Michigan, as an artist in residence selected by the National Park Service, which is so cool.
Yeah.
How did you find out about this program, and also how did you know that you needed this kind of environment to write?
Well, I mean, when I, there again, it goes back to, I think when I was a kid, I was fascinated with wolves, absolutely enamored with them because of my grandfather, because of, going to Yellowstone. I think I had heard of Isle Royale, and it took me a couple times to get there. The first time I went, I thought you could just drive up, to northern Minnesota and hop on a boat and just head over, and you can't. You have to book your reservation on your passage on the ferry. It's
and fill out a form.
It's not a day trip. You know what I mean? It's not a leisure trip.
Does it take? You said it took like 6 hours to get there by boat?
Yeah, it does. Wow. It does.
What time of year did you go?
The residency was in September. My first attempt, didn't work out, like I said, but I went back there. I had a day trip in someone else's boat who took us out just to see it, and then I also went out with my partner, and we backpacked. And so from being there, I found out about the artist program, and, I just said, if there's a God, capital, small, lowercase g, I really think I could make this residency really valuable, really work for me if I got the chance. And so I applied, and when I found out I got accepted, I mean, I almost wept. I just was so much in need of that solitude, because I also had been pretty much running the Pines and managing the Pines and booking the Pines, and it squeezes out. It
doing
squeezes
the
away.
taxes.
Yeah, and it squeezes out the room that it takes to write the kind of songs that you'd want to write, Mm-hmm. So yeah, I went out in September. It was a 2-week residency in a little cabin on a point looking out over Lake Superior. And then, lo and behold, the Park Service is maybe the last institution in the country that knows how to leave somebody alone and not bother them,
Yeah.
I mean, that's all they do, is try to leave things alone and not mess them up. So they didn't bother me. They didn't make demands of me. They didn't. They really just let me work out there and enjoy the park, and it was very fruitful.
Can you talk about, as a writer, what that kind of solitude that you experienced on the island does for you and for your work?
Yeah, I can say that, if you weren't prepared for it and you asked too much of the experience, you might come away with nothing or not much. It could have gone that way for me. I think that what everybody wants to believe is if you go off to a cabin somewhere, some magic, the god of magic and poems is going to come to you and just bless you with songs. It just doesn't work that way. It's like I had a few things in process. I'd been writing and working on stuff for a while. I just needed the sustained attention to complete the thoughts, and once, 7 or 8 songs were completed, then I also was in the mode to start new things from scratch. I brought more poetry books and history books than I did food. I mean, I just, it's such a gift to not be bothered for a while. In solitude, a lot of really cool work can be done in the marketplace of ideas and in the on the road and in these busy, noisy places. But after a while, you better be able to hear yourself think, because I wanted the songs to come from a deep place of quietude and not from just a noisy place. These are
I found this great quote from you about your subconscious, So it says, your subconscious is always trying to help you. It's collecting information. It's where free association comes from.
Yeah.
It sounds like you have a pretty good grasp of your subconscious. Is that true?
I think I've made better friends with it in the last couple of years than I have ever. I think that I've learned how to listen when it's speaking up, whether it be in dreams or whether it be in a passing phrase or a line or a word that kind of resonates in the middle of the day. And when you're busy, you collect these things in your notebook, and if you're lucky, somebody gives you a cabin and some days where you can actually spread them out like a map in front of you and start to see, where the paths are. But yeah, you have to be friends with your subconscious. You have to make some kind of peace and be friends, so it's not just screaming at you all day and you're ignoring it.
Just ignoring it, yeah. Would you liken subconsciousness to like intuition?
For sure.
I don't know if they're the same thing, but they seem pretty related, So intuition is definitely
absolutely
something that people often ignore.
Absolutely. Yeah. The flash, the flashing thought that, if you weren't paying attention, you would miss it and it would go away. But that might be the thing that's of brilliance that someone else was ready for and was able to follow, It's like, it's the difference between, I heard it described that 90% of people who visit Yellowstone National Park, they only see 10% of the park because they drive the road that goes to Old Faithful. They get out and take a couple pictures, and then they drive on, and they're still looking at the world basically through a screen, which is a window, And your subconscious is the other 90% of the park, that if you get off on a trail, some shit might happen, you better be ready.
So how did this experience on the island affect your relationship to climate change?
Well, I was fortunate enough to meet two individuals. Rolf and Candy Peterson have been doing the moose and wolf study program for 40 years. It's the longest running research program of its kind, where, every year they go out and they count the moose the best they can, and they count the wolves, and they study skeletal remains of the moose to find out if they were, if they were hunted and preyed and or if they were injured, or it's just that it's so remote and so consistent that, when I was there, they explained to me there's approximately 1,700 moose on this island eating themselves out of house and home, and there's only 2 wolves left, down from 50 in the 90s, and they're inbred and they're not able to hunt, and it's out of balance. And I just thought, especially as like at first glance, this place is pristine. It's untouched wilderness. It's like, it's like Jurassic Park, the most beautiful. One island surrounded by 300 smaller islands in the middle of the biggest lake and all that stuff. But once you start to look closely, you realize if that place is not immune to climate change, Lake Superior is warming up, there's no ice road, no new wolves can cross over to the island, then if that place is not immune, then no place is immune. And I think that was the wildest place I'd ever been, but still there was old abandoned mines on the island. There was abandoned fisheries. Like, they tried to figure out how to make this place profitable, and in the 70s they said, well, forget it, we'll just make it a park. But
smooth move.
Yeah, right? Yeah. That's, the climate change stuff was already in my consciousness from some of the activism here in Minnesota, from Winona LaDuke and from Standing Rock, the anti-pipeline things that are going on. There's an Arctic explorer that lives here in Minnesota named Will Steger, who has been partnering with Al Gore and Bill McKibben. There's a lot of awareness in Minnesota, but I think being out there in the middle of nowhere and just saying, wow, even this place is getting clobbered, that brought things to light.
Stranger Angels, I've read, is a record about thin places. Can you explain that concept of thin places?
You know, I mean, I feel like there are those that could do a much better job. I understand it as being, you know, quite often it's a place that you feel it before you think it, you know, and it's a place, whether by strangeness of geography or maybe by human interaction, you know, ritual, vision quest. It's a place where it's not so difficult to understand our connection to the spirit world, you know, and even the woods at night. I mean, if you saw the video that I did for Stranger Angels, it's got all this night camera footage of animals in the dark, you know, doing crazy animal things, you know, for no audience. If that's not, you know, I don't know what the difference between that and spirits are, you know. And so thin places are, they're charged places. They're places where maybe the hair on the back of your neck stands up, you know, and they're all over the place. They really are. It doesn't have to be nature. It can be a certain location deep in the midst of Manhattan. It can be, you know, Bear Butte in South Dakota in the Black Hills, Devil's Tower. I just think that, they're places of significance where you realize how small you are.
So this topic makes me think about your grandmother, so she passed away soon before you got to go to the island. And you said, I didn't really get to mourn her properly until I went out into the woods and was free enough to do so. So how did you connect with her during your time on the island?
All these things we're talking about fit together. Part of it's intuition. It's like my grandma was such a presence, such a voice, such a sensitivity that it's hard to believe that goes away when someone dies. And I feel like I'm a pretty skeptical person. I mean, I didn't really buy into heaven or hell ideas after a while, and but the unnameable connection you feel with, you know, someone who used to sit right in front of you is now in the ground, but I still, in my consciousness, think of her as sitting right in front of me. I still hear things that she would say. I still have ideas of what she might think. So there's a closeness, and also it's whatever she taught me, and not just her, but many others. You know, those are a lot of the driving factors that help me encounter my world. You know, those are her ideas in a lot of ways, her values. So they're transferable, and you know, they say that matter is not created or destroyed, and I think spirit is much the same. I remember after John Trudell passed away, I saw Louise Erdrich, the novelist, right here in Minneapolis, and I talked briefly, and I said, you know, I'm glad we got to work with him. It's sad that he's gone. And she just kind of laughed, and she said, I don't think a voice like that could ever possibly be gone. And I understand what she meant, you know. You could say it's memory, keeping someone's memory alive, but it's also, there's some kind of communication that you have, you know. Call it intuition, call it even reminiscence or memory, genetic memory or something, but it's a real thing. It's just it can be more motivating than a Facebook ad telling you that you need to buy new shoes. I mean, I'd rather believe the former, you know?
Yeah. I want to talk about Every Wind, a song on the new album, which I read about as a celebration of women. This song was inspired by a postcard you found at a trading post. Can you talk about the inspiration?
I found myself on the island writing all these songs that if I was at home or on the run, I just wouldn't have had the time or the patience to see them through. And I literally had the postcard. You know, it's just what it is it's a woman standing on the shores of Lake Superior. She's also on the cover of the record. It's
a beautiful cover.
Thank you. I think so too. It's a friend of mine, Cheyenne Randall, made the cover, and he had made the image Every Wind against the hymnal before I even asked him. And what was inspiring, I guess, was just this is 1907, this photograph by Roland Reed, and it just says every wind. There's no place on Google where you could find out more information about this human being that lived, That's all that we know. But she had a name, she had a life. So this song, without getting too deep or even political, it's really just a celebration of, how do you pull someone's memory up out of the depths, and dust it off and bring it back to light. And we're doing this all the time. I mean, this is what Rick Rubin did to Johnny Cash before he passed away. This is, something valuable has been maybe, passed by or trampled over, and maybe it's time to go back and recover it and amplify it so we don't lose other valuable things, That was kind of the idea. And then also, the morning after Trump won the election, everyone from my girlfriend to my mother, all the women that I spoke to, the first response was fear. It was this deep sadness and this deep fear, like all of a sudden they weren't safe. And what a horrific feeling, to have. And so part of it is this idea that, woman has endured all that man has done and continues to birth the world, and to sort of ground the toxic parts of it and create life. And so all those things, that's kind of, I know that's a lot.
Well, I like how you were like, not to get too deep or political, and then you're like, I'm going to get super deep and also Trump.
Yeah. That's I have a tendency to tell you exactly what I'm not going to do before I do it. But,
brace yourself. Here it comes.
Yeah.
No, it's cool. No, I love it. I love everything that you've said. I was in preparing for this interview, I was like, oh my God, like it sounds like you are somebody who just really, you're always like speaking poetically. So every interview answer you would give, I would have like 1,000 ideas for what to talk to you about. This is actually kind of a challenge to prepare for this, but I think we're doing okay.
I think so. I don't know if I've ever done an interview where someone was as familiar, prepared, and and actually had attuned to some of these details. So it's even a challenge for me, and I'm really grateful.
Oh, it doesn't sound like it, and thank you very much. So I got one more question here, and then we've had such serious conversation here, and I want to know a little bit about something. I don't have anything like specific, but like we've talked about spirituality and intuition and the rights of indigenous people and the rights of women and all these like very serious and heavy topics. But I also get the sense, just because you're somebody who really values friendship and really values community and thriving with other people, that maybe humor is in your world somehow, and I just want to hear about where it is.
Oh God, it's without which there will be no anything else. I mean, to me, there's a special class of human beings on the front lines of every social movement, and they're always the comedians. I mean, and
yeah, you mentioned Mitch Hedberg.
Yeah,
he's a very thoughtful comedian.
Oh God, and when I talk about John Trudell, his corollary was George Carlin. I think the thing we've learned, you can't insult somebody and then hope to change their mind. And I don't know, even the Pines, we had a very interesting way of going about, our shows, and it was to lay down these heavy songs and then literally, joke about what the cop who pulled us over had to say to us in this small town. And humor is so essential. And at the end of the day, surrounding myself with friends who can cut something to shreds with a joke in an instant. I find a lot of things really funny. I find yesterday, for example, in Duluth. I'm playing a festival with Winona LaDuke, who was a vice presidential candidate with Ralph Nader. She founds this massive organization, and they send a television reporter down to the festival to interview her and I. This kid, he's pretty young, but he's literally clipping a mic onto her shirt, and he says to her, "Now, have you ever done a television interview before?" And she looked at me, and I looked at her, and it was just like, it was hysterical. It's like, of course he had no idea who he was talking to. There's no one probably within 1,000 miles that had done more interviews.
Right.
But after she got done, I said, I think that went pretty well for your first time, And she said, tonight will probably be the first time that you're on stage. I hope that goes well for you as well. So, yeah.
That's good.
It is. You're absolutely right. It's critical. And actually, humor is a way to show people that you're paying attention and that you give a damn,
Yeah.
Especially in a live music situation.
You mean that if you're a performer on stage and you bring humor into like whatever you're talking about, it's like that you care about the audience and want to relax them and something like that?
Yeah, I think so. And that, a lot of times what was funny is what happened 5 minutes ago, And, there are masters out there. I remember I was having a conversation with Iris Dement, and I said, Iris, is it true, that John Prine, before every show, he has to have 2 Dairy Queen hot dogs? I said, I heard that somewhere. She says, oh, God, no, that's not true at all. She says, Dairy Queen French fries. And he only takes 1 bite. He only eats half of each fry, and then he throws the other one away, And I'm just like, well, thanks for clearing that up for me. 'Cause I'm so glad to know that now,
All right, so I got one more question. It kind of bounces off of that. So the album, Stranger Angels, there is 2 different forces on it, solace versus community. I don't know if they're not conflicting, but the album actually marries the 2 together very well because you wrote these songs in such solace on the island, but then recorded them among a very lovely community of musicians. Now, for you, can you talk about the conflicting forces you feel when it comes to loving both solitude and community?
It would be pretty hard to imagine one without the other. It's a cliche to say they're 2 sides of the same coin, but I was in theology school. I was considering, it occurred to me to live in a monastic experience in life like Thomas Merton or something, and to shut yourself away. And it's really easy to overthink all these things, but what feels right is to have, to have an individual vision and to carry it forth in the world with friendships and partnerships. Like, I think that living in pretty urgent times, if you have something that might help people, you probably better get out there and learn how to talk to some folks and learn how to spend it, and throw it, into the pile of supplies that we're going to need to fix the shit that's going on, because don't withhold, And at the same time, what I know too is after, a year of touring, performing, collaborating, it's like, I haven't written anything new in quite a while, and in order to get back there and, sort of turn the page and turn the soil, I'm gonna probably have to do it on my own, So they revolve kind of like phases of the moon. But any beautiful thing you create, you're not making it just for yourself, It's like, I think there's an impulse to create it, there's an impulse to share it, and then there's the total shit show of having to figure out how to sell it. And that's the worst part by far. So
Yep, 100% agree. It's got great content. We just don't have the audience.
It takes a while. It really does.
Well, David, you have great content.
Thank you so much.
Will you do something kind of silly with me right now? So we'll do a thing called the lightning round.
Yeah.
All right, good. So we'll take a break and come back and do the lightning round. Basic Folk receives support from McDean, songwriters who love each other. McDean would be delighted to send you a free CD of their first EP, The Sampler Plate. Email lin@mcdean.co. lin@mcdean.co to get one. And thanks to WIUP in Indiana, Pennsylvania, which airs Basic Folk 2 p.m. Eastern every Saturday. You can listen on their website, wiupfm.org. All right, David Huckfelt, are you ready for the lightning round?
Yeah, in as much as I have no idea what it entails, yes.
You will like it. These are just like quick 1 or 2 word answers to these questions. Okay, here we go. Dogs or cats or something else?
Dogs and something else.
What is your favorite U.S. city?
Astoria.
Who is your favorite teacher?
I would say Mrs. Merrill, my 4th grade teacher who read the BFG and printed up her own money for classrooms so we could buy gum and chocolate.
Oh man, what a socialist. First album you bought with your own money?
I think it was probably Dire Straits. Money for Nothing, the Dire Straits record.
What was your first concert?
The surviving members of the band Survivor playing Eye of the Tiger in Iowa. Yeah.
Wow, so epic. What is your dream collaboration?
Oh man, living or dead?
It's a dream, so whatever you want.
Oh, then in that case, I think I'd probably want to be locked in a studio with Howlin' Wolf and a band and just see if I could survive that. Yeah.
Beatles or Rolling Stones?
Both.
Gibson or Martin?
You know, I'm a through and through Gibson guy. I feel like if you drop a Gibson, it falls off its stand. It's much more likely to survive and sound better than a Martin, which might be a little hurt by the experience.
Okay, one more. What is a random fact about anything that I might not know?
Well, you forced me into a corner by talking about myself so much, so my first thought is to tell you that I don't have a spleen, and that now I'm looking at my middle toes on both feet, and they're stuck together. They're fused. I have webbed toes, so I don't think you knew that.
I actually didn't know that.
Okay.
But thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome.
That's amazing. David, this has been really lovely to talk to you. I was so, like I said, you have such a beautiful outlook on the world, and I think you do us a huge service by not only writing and creating music, but also talking about your music as well. So it was a real pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Well, I'm completely blown away. I mean, I wasn't familiar. I haven't listened to your program, and we didn't know if I should expect an interview or if you would ask me, like Winona LaDuke, if I had ever done one of these, and But just it's been such a pleasure talking to you. It's excellent conversation. I feel like we could go for another few hours, but I thank you so much is what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, my pleasure, truly.
I really enjoyed David's comment about how he's like, I am having trouble answering these questions. They are very intense. Well, that is the point, but I appreciate it. It is. I mean, sometimes people will try to ask me questions about my feelings, and I, completely just clam up. So David did a wonderful job, and I appreciate it. Check out his album, Stranger Angels, and you can find show notes at cindyhouse.net. Adam Corey produced this episode of Basic Folk. Lindsay Myers is our business manager. Music by Alex Stanton. I'm your host, Cindy House. Again, go to the website, cindyhouse.net. You can also sign up for our mailing list there. You can go to our Facebook group, Basic Folk Basics. Sign up for that and get in on the fun and conversation that happens there. And I will talk to you next week. Okay, bye.